Hello everyone and welcome to my Magicka Nightblade DPS guide for the Stonethorn patch. Let's jump right into it. This patch, the Magicka Nightblade, is probably the strongest, if not definitely the strongest class in the game due to their amazing sustain and high damage with the buffs that they were given this patch. So our character sheet looks kind of like this. It's not very important because your character sheet and your stats are always going to change based on the gear that you're wearing. However, I do choose to go with High Elf. High Elf is the highest damage race for Magicka Nightblade, followed by Dark Elf, Khajiit, and Breton in that order. Breton is nice for beginner players. However, if you do want highest end game damage, I do recommend going with High Elf. For the food, we're using Allure, which is otherwise known as Artaeum Pickled Fishbowl. If your group is a little bit newer and doesn't have the proper buffs and debuff sets, I do recommend switching with Clockwork Citrus Filet, which would be the second best option. And then lastly, if you're just practicing your rotation on the dummy, I do recommend using the Ghastly eyeball for the sustain. As far as potions go, we have two options when it comes to the build. The first is our regular spell pots, which give you intellect, sorcery, and prophecy. However, if your tank is using igneous weapons and you have inner light slotted, you can always go with the minor heroism potions, which are going to give you magicka, stamina if you choose to as well, depending on how you craft them, and ult. So this is going to give you a lot more incaps, soul harvest, whatever you're using during the fights. For the Mundus, we're using the Shadow Mundus. It's still the best, even though some got some buffs. Shadow is still the best. We're always going to be running all divines, so that is still the way to go. Let's jump into our champion points next. So champion points are always going to vary. However, this is a nice standard to use. Let's take a look at the blue CP. We have 61 Elfborn, 64 Elemental Expert, 10 Spell Erosion. Now this is completely going to depend on your group. If you have Alkosh, if you have Power of the Light in your group, you have to adjust this depending on how much pen your supports are going to give you. Then we have 72 Master Arms, 29 Staff Expert, and lastly we have 34 Thaumaturge. Now can you use off-balance CP? Absolutely. In longer fights it may give you slightly more damage. However, this is a nice base and it works for every single trial, every single dungeon, all content in the game. The red and the green CP are completely up to you and also may vary depending on what content you're doing. However, this is a nice baseline as well. 66 Ironclad, 22 Spell Shield, 27 Hardy, 75 Elemental Defender because most trials and dungeons do have elemental damage, 48 Thick Skinned, and 32 Quick Recovery. And for the green CP, 28 Warlord, 19 Bashing Focus, 5 Sprinter, 100 Arcanist, 56 Tenacity, 31 Shadow Ward, and 31 Tumbling. Now again, you do have to communicate with your tank based on their Alkosh, based on your debuffs, how you're going to run your CP, and of course you can always change your red CP based on the trials. Now let's get into the nitty gritty, which is your gear and the skill setup. So we have a lot of different setups that are very viable and very useful this patch. Let's get started with all of our single target setups, okay? So for the single target setups, the first and the go-to for any stationary fights is going to be Sororia, Sorrow, Maw, and yes, Sorrow is still very, very good this patch. Sororia got a nice buff, you build the stacks quicker, so it also got a very, very nice DPS boost. Taking a look at the actual gear, we're going to have heavy, medium, Maw on the shoulder and the head. We're going to have Sororia on the front bar with the staff. You can also use Sorrow on the front bar. It's not a huge difference, but if you can farm the Sororia Inferno staff, I highly recommend doing so because it is a proc set and it's nice to have just on one bar. Then we're obviously going to have Sorrow, and we're always using Bloodthirsty Jewelry. It is definitely better than Infused, starting at 63%. So for 63% of the fight, Bloodthirsty is always going to outperform Infused. On the back bar, we're always going to have our Maelstrom Inferno staff. Doesn't have to be perfected. It can be a regular Inferno staff that you can farm on normal Maelstrom Arena. It's always going to have a Berserker Glyph. If you are doing Daedric fights, you can definitely switch this to Prismatic. The front bar is always going to be precise, Filet and Damage Glyph. The first setup is this, Sorrow, Sororia, Maw. The second setup is with the new set. Now, this does change things up a little bit. Because Medusa is a heavy armor set, you want to have 2 pieces on the body, 3 pieces on the jewelry, And then your monster set does have to be both light. Again, we're using Soraya front bar, Maelstrom back bar, everything Divines, everything Bloodthirsty, Precise, and Fused on the back bar. The next nice setup for mobile fights, where you have to move around, or you need a little bit more sustain, or you can't stand in one place, False Gods, Sorrow, Ma works just as well. All the same traits, pretty much the same exact setup, you're just changing up the gear pieces. And you can have False Gods on your front bar instead of Mother Sorrow, or you can choose to go with Mother Sorrow on the front bar. It's really up to you. Another nice setup is with Medusa. Now the reason why Medusa is so nice this patch is because the 5-piece gives you minor force at all times, so you don't have to use Rearming Trap or Channeled Acceleration, which gives you bar space. And as you can see, we're able to place Inner Light on the front bar for a little bit more max Magicka, and Orb on the back bar instead of either Trap or Channeled Acceleration. Now again, False Gods Medusa, you do have to run False Gods front bar because remember, Medusa always has to be on the body and the jewelry. Next setup is Sorrow Spell Strat. It's also a really nice setup. It gives you a lot of single target, but it is hard to sustain because you have no False Gods. So if your group is good and your sustain is fine, you can definitely go with this. It's going to give you a really nice single target. Another really nice setup, especially for Asylum Sanctorium, is War Maiden. If you're using Soul Harvest and Swallow Soul, it's going to give you a lot of magic damage. War Maiden did get buffed. It adds 600 spell damage to your magic damage abilities, and the 2, 3, and 4 pieces are quite nice as well. And then last but not least, another really nice setup that we use is Sorrow, Burning Spellweave, and Maw. Burning Spellweave also got a nice buff. It no longer has a chance to proc. It's always going to proc as soon as there's burning status effect on the enemy, which is going to be 8 seconds up, 4 seconds down. It's going to reproc again, 8 seconds up, 4 seconds down. I do recommend front barring this if you can, because again, it's a proc set, it's going to carry over to the back bar. However, having a Sorrow Inferno Staff on the front bar is just fine. Let's go over the single target skills that we're using. So our front bar is usually going to look something like this. We're going to have Crippling Grasp. It is not the strongest dot, and you can easily drop it if you want to put on another Siphoning ability, or if you have some AoE fights, you can always use Sap Essence as well. However, we do need this for the max Magicka passive, which is increase your max Magicka by 8% while the Siphoning ability is slotted. So we need to make sure that we have that on the front bar, and if you can, the back bar as well. Next is Mystic Orb. Now you're going to see a lot of people using Entropy or Degeneration on the front bar for a bunch of dummy tests. Again, this is one of the strongest hitting abilities for Magicka Nightblade or any Magicka class, so make sure you're using Mystic Orb. It's amazing in all content. Next, we have Impale. That's our execute. We're going to spam the living hell out of this at 25% or less. Merciless Resolve. Now, there have been some questions about how it got changed. It is still good to use the bow procs. If you can use it on the 5th light attack, do so. If your ping doesn't allow it, 6th light attack is just fine. Elemental Weapon is still the best spammable. You can also use Swallow Soul if you do need a little bit more healing, in which case I would change out this for Inner Light, just like you see in the setup here or the setup here. Swallow Soul and LE Weapon almost have no damage difference. However, Elemental Weapon does have a chance to proc Burning, Concussion, or Chilled, so it does have a chance to do a little bit more damage than Swallow Soul, but the damage difference is very minor. Next, we have Incapacitating Strike. Now, I do recommend using Soul Harvest instead. It's going to give you a little bit more damage and does give you a chance to regen ultimate when you're killing mobs. However, if you're struggling with sustain, I do recommend using Incap. That's going to just boost your sustain just a little bit, which is in the end going to give you a little bit more damage, because no sustain means no damage at all. On the back bar, Siphoning attacks. That's our sustain. We do have to keep it up. If your group is good, you might be able to drop it during execute, but throughout the fight you do have to keep it up. It also gives us some nice healing. Barb Trap or Channeled Acceleration. Again, if you're using Medusa, you don't need any of these. So you would use a setup that looks kind of like this. You would put Crippling Grasp on the front bar, put Inner Light on the front bar, and put Mystic Orb in the back bar. Unstable Wall of Fire. This is our main dot. You have to keep this up 100% of the time. Dark Shade, you can cast this out of combat, you can pre-buff with it now, so it's really, really nice. Twisting Path, our strongest dot on the Magicka Nightblade, you have to keep this up even during execute the whole time. And last but not least, Fiery Rage. Now, if you are able to pre-buff, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, with an Elfbane Destro, you can simply change your setup to double barring Incap and keeping both of these up the whole time. However, if you're not able to switch right before combat, put Fiery Rage on, use it. It's still one of the strongest ultimates in the game. Now again, the other bar setups that you can use if you're not using Medusa is using Swallow Soul as a spammable. This makes the rotation a little bit easier. You only have to focus on keeping up 1, 2, 3, 4 dots versus 5 dots with Crippling Grasp. Not only that, but you are gaining a lot of self-healing, so if you want to play a little bit safer and easier, I do recommend this bar setup. And again, if you're using Medusa, you don't need channeled or barbed, so you can double bar Inner Light for an even easier rotation. That's it for our single target setups. Let's go over the trash setups that we're going to be using in most trials. So I found that there are 3 optimal trash setups. The first one is still Perfected False Gods, Mother Sorrow. Now for the monster set, what we're going to be using is 1-piece Valken and 1-piece Crit. You can do 2-piece Valken, it's not going to give you a major difference. I prefer Valken and Crit. Now why we're using Valken? Because it does have a 1-piece spell penetration, and that allows us to use a precise staff. The enchant doesn't matter, backbar is still infused, all the jewelry again is bloodthirsty, all the pieces are divines, and we are running 5-1-1. The second setup is with Medusa. Now with Medusa, that allows us to keep siphoning attacks, so that's a siphoning ability on both bars, as well as proxy that, obviously the same as this one. So this is just going to give you a little bit more sustain. You're not going to have to worry about casting channeled. This is really, really nice. It's always almost going to give you the same exact damage as Mother of Sorrow. However, when you do have time when you're running into trash and pre-buffing, I do recommend using the Sorrow setup. However, if it's wave after wave, consistent damage, Medusa is really, really nice. And again, this is different. So we have to have 2 light, 2 heavy Medusa on the jewelry, False Gods on the front bar. Last but not least is the Acuity trash setup. Now Acuity trash setup is a little bit different. We're gonna have False Gods, Acuity front bar, and then we're running, this could be any piece. It could be double Scoria, it could be Balorgs, it's completely up to you. I chose to wear Maw the Infernal just because that's what I had in my inventory. Heavy, medium, all light. Now this is amazing for 1-wave trash or any trash that's going to die in under 10 seconds. This is going to give you the most burst on trash. So when you have just 1 wave, or 1 wave then a break, and then a 1 wave then a break, Acuity is simply going to proc immediately and no longer has a chance. It's going to proc for 5 seconds. So if the trash dies within 6 to 8 seconds, this is by far the best set for you to use. It does have an 18-second cooldown, so it's going to be up for 5 seconds, down for 13. By the time those 13 seconds are up, you're placing your dots on your back bar, you swap to your front bar, everything dies. You have a 100% crit chance. Now let's talk about the skills. Now again, we did mention it a little bit, but here are the skills. On the front bar we have Camo Hunter. Usually in trash we only have 1 healer. If you have 2 healers you can remove this for Inner Light. However, for end game pushing groups you're always going to have 1 healer on trash. The other healer is going to be off DPSing, and it's very, very difficult, nearly impossible for 1 healer to keep up combat prayer on 12 people in trash because people are literally all over the place. This is our main spammable, Sap Essence. Remember to block if you're going melee. Impale for the last couple of mobs or last 1 mob that's alive. Don't impale low health adds when there's a high health ad up. Merciless Resolve, get 5 stacks, keep it up, don't actually use it. And Force Pulse if you have less than 3 targets. More than 3 targets, 3 or more targets, Sap Essence. Less than 3 targets, Force Pulse. And I do recommend using Soul Harvest if you're able to sustain instead of Incap Strike. I just have the other more. On the back bar, proxy that. Channel Acceleration as you're going into the round. Wall, keep it up to 100% of the time. Orb, really strong. Twisting Path. And Fiery Rage. And again, if you're wearing Medusa, you can simply switch the back bar to not have channeled. And you'll have proxy and siphoning to pre-buff to help out with your sustain and a little bit more max magic on the back bar. Now lastly, I want to go over the pre-buff setups because I've been getting a lot of questions on what I'm doing, what I'm pre-buffing with, and this is how it works. Before the fight starts, what you want to do is you want to have your friends throw some orbs at you, and usually what happens is when you cast Channel Acceleration, it only lasts 35 seconds, right? You can see the minor force on the left of my character. However, if I use a pre-buff Jorvald setup, now my minor force is going to last 50 seconds, which is almost a duration on many of the short fights in the game. Either way, it's a huge duration. It adds 15 seconds to the original, so I do recommend pre-buffing with this so you have some free GCDs during the fight. Moondancer is also very nice because when your friends throw something at you like a synergy or an orb before the fight, you can get a nice proc for 20 seconds giving you either Magicka recovery or spell damage. Either or, both are good. One's going to help your sustain, one's going to help your damage. So I do recommend trying to grab a synergy before the fight and pre-buffing with channeled anywhere you can. And then obviously if you need some Magicka, you use this. If the boss doesn't spawn, you use this. And there it is. Lastly, I use a Master Architect and Elfbane Destro pre-buff. So if the boss is spawning in 2 seconds, you can drop a Destro. Then you can swap to your regular single target setup. And now you're going to have Major Slayer and a longer lasting Destro for the fight. That's a really tricky thing that you have to practice and learn. You're going to get stuck in the wrong setups very often, but when it works, it does give you a really nice DPS boost. So that's pretty much it for the setups. Now let's go over the rotation and what we want to focus on when we're doing actual damage in the trial. I'm going to use the Ghastly Eyeball for this one, and let's take a look. So the prioritization for dots is going to work like this. So for the trash, it's pretty simple. If you have time to pre-buff before the trash, you're simply going to go in, use a Channel Acceleration, proxy that, and then you start Wall, Twisting, Orb, make sure your Merciless is up, and then you spam if it's 3 targets or more, or you spam Force Pulse if it's 2 targets or less. If you have Stay range, Force Pulse is still very good, and you can absolutely spam this and still do great damage depending on wherever you have to stand in the fight. Sometimes melee positions can be dangerous, you have to kind of avoid them. And again, these 3 dots you always have to keep up, unless something is almost dead, then you just execute it. So make sure you pre-damage with them, absolutely for sure. Now let's take a look at the single target rotation and what we need to prioritize, what we need to keep up, what we need to focus on. So before the fight, you're always going to pre-buff with Siphoning attacks, Merciless Resolve, and now you can pre-buff with Shade as well. You're usually going to have Channeled Acceleration already up. In this case, I don't have Channeled Acceleration up, so I'm just going to come in and put a trap. Now, the dot prioritization is going to work like this. You're going to always prioritize Blockade, then Twisting, then Orb, then Cripple. Now, Shade does come before Cripple or Orb. Shade is your 3rd most important dot, so you need to make sure that you always keep Shade up. So the actual dot prioritization is always going to be Wall, Twisting, Shade, Orb, Cripple. Very important. Whenever your force goes down, make sure you recast Trap if you can 1 second earlier. For all the other dots, you need to make sure that you almost let them run out or let them run out before you recast them. So in real time, the rotation is going to look like this. We put our buffs up, we cast Shade, Trap, and then we start with our dots. Now once you have your dots up, here's how the Incap timing is going to work. Once you have all your dots up, you want to use your bow, and then you want to use 4 spammables after the Incap. Try not to recast your dots. So before you use Incap, try to make sure all your dots up, they all have time on them. And then you would Incap, bow, and use your spammables. You can bash reef if you want, but it doesn't add too much damage, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. So in full time, the rotation is going to look kind of like this. Let's take a look. I see the Incap up. I'm gonna make sure my dots are up and just spammable. If one runs out for 2 seconds, it's not a big deal. I'll recast after. And there it is. I'm not gonna do the whole dummy test because there are tons and tons of video on how to kill dummies out there. I'm sure you can look at the rotation, you can take a look. But this is a dynamic rotation. Dynamic rotations are gonna give you the best results. If you don't want to use a dynamic rotation, or if you don't want to think about it, or especially if you're playing on console, the static rotation would look something like this. Same pre-buff. And then you would cast all of your dots once. You would incap, bow, get another bow, and then you recast your dots again. The only thing that you do have to keep track of is shade. So I would use strap one rotation, and then shade the next rotation. For all the console players out there that can track your buffs, unfortunately, either come to PC or use a static rotation. It's probably going to give you a little bit more damage. That's pretty much it for the Nightblade build. Guys, I really hope that this helped you out, explain some things maybe that you didn't know. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the description. I'll try to answer as many as I can. And if it did help you, please make sure to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.